Hi, and welcome to the CAFMA Connect. I'm your host, Fire Chief Scott Freitag, and with me today, my very special guest who did a good job getting out of the hazmat episode, Battalion Chief Brad Davis.
Thanks for having me, Chief.
Well, thanks for being here, Brad. And today we want to talk about the Ocotillo fire. Did I get that correct?
Yep.
Okay, so
that's real close, yes.
Had a fire last week, very significant fire in a neighborhood near here. And so we thought we'd just talk about it. This is not the after action review for the CAFMA personnel. That'll happen on April 20th.
Yep, Thursday. We're all going to be doing that.
Okay. So today we just want to talk about it from a community perspective because this was an interesting fire with a number of exposures, how quickly the fire progressed, how involved the original structure was when you got on scene. So Brad, start from there. You got dispatched to a structure fire, heavy smoke column in the distance.
Yes,
go from there.
I responded from admin, and so when I came off of Eastridge and made my right onto Navajo, very obvious that we had a working fire, very visible column. And one of the engine companies had called it in prior to that too, saying the same thing, that it was a working fire and they could see large amounts of smoke. Okay.
I could see smoke as I was coming back into town from Phoenix. I saw a large column of smoke in that direction, and I was thinking, do we have a wildland fire? Is you picking on fire again? What's going on? And I looked at my phone. There was no calls at that time. And then a couple minutes later, the dispatch came through.
And then you looked at your shift schedule and said, oh, B shift's on, we're good.
Yeah, right. B shift's here. 58 should be first into that, but Mongo wasn't there. It was actually Captain Snyder.
Yeah.
And so 58 was the first in crew, and I just want to give a shout out to 58, 53, and all the crews that came in after. Outstanding job on a very tough fire.
Yes. And also on the smoke. Todd Abel told me that before our calls came in and we got our text messages and whatnot, that the Spruce Forest Lookout up on the mountain had called it in on their radio, seeing a large column of smoke in Prescott Valley.
Oh, wow.
So, it was visible from quite a ways away. 58 got there first. Now, 58 and 53 basically got there at the same time.
Okay.
Knowing what way 58 was going to be coming in, Travis Smith was the captain on engine 53. Knowing that info of where that other engine was coming from, he went the other way to get a hydrant.
Okay.
Which we'll talk about too, that hydrants were sparse in the neighborhood here.
So what did they see when they first arrived on scene? What did they have?
They got there, the house was completely 100% involved.
Okay.
And an absolute threat to exposures. I can't recall on the radio traffic if there was already an exposure on fire or was imminent.
Okay.
But all three sides were threatened. So we had the main house fully involved, but then absolute threats to houses on all three sides.
And when we talk about exposures, a lot of time we talk about, sheds or vehicles. And in this case, we had vehicles, we had sheds.
All of the above.
But then we had three other homes
Yes.
that served as exposures as well. So there was a lot of potential for a catastrophic event in that area.
Yeah. So that first in officer, we had a mix of folks that day. I joked about B shift, but Tim Snyder is our captain at 58 on C shift. He was working overtime on 58 that day. One of our other Prescott Valley units on truck 50 was Rob Pruitt, who was an A shift captain. So we did have a mixture of the other shifts involved. But Tim made some very quick decisions, knowing we needed to get water on it right away. Lots of water, which there was no hydrant close by. So just to put it in perspective, that first in engine had 1,000 gallons of water on it, which to people not in the fire service, 1,000 gallons of water, that's a lot of water. That only lasts a couple of minutes.
Right.
So for this engine, they pulled two lines off. They pulled a 2.5 and they pulled 1 3/4 inch.
Okay.
So that's 400 gallons a minute that they're flowing out of those two lines.
Right.
So they basically you take what it takes to fill the hoses with water and then actually flowing. They had about 2 minutes of water is all they had on the fire truck. So that's why it's so important that we try to get hydrants involved and get that secured source from a hydrant.
So how many feet of large diameter hose did they lay into the engine?
That first engine that arrived, 58, 53 laid in, I believe, around 700 from that hydrant at the other end of Ocotillo and brought that to them. But we also had units on Glen Rosa, which is the street behind where we had exposures.
Right.
That lay was 1,800 feet. to get to that hydrant on that side.
1,800 feet of large diameter hose.
Yes, and we carry 1,200 feet of large diameter hose on one engine, so it took 2 engines worth of hose to get to that hydrant. And another concern too, when we have that long of a hose lay, we need to have a fire truck pumping the hydrant,
right,
so that we're controlling those pressures and can bump that up, getting to them. Luckily, both hydrants were very hot, but we still had engines on both ends pumping to those attack engines that were pumping the fire.
Well, and on, I think that was Spouse, right up off of Ocotillo, they actually had to block the street because they had the engine pumping and the large diameter hose laying across the street. And that's a challenge when we have very few hydrants in the older part of town. I know, and I'm going to put this in here because it helps support what the town's trying to do right now, which is add hydrants into those areas. The challenge they have is when the town was laid out, some of those water mains were put behind homes instead of in front at the street. Then you have easement issues. So for those that live in that neighborhood, the town wants to put more fire hydrants in, but there are some challenges with actually getting to the water mains and getting the hydrants out to the street.
Yes, and you know, another challenge in that same area. When I came in, I got there right behind 58 and 53. But when I came in off of Ranger onto Spouse, to me, the best way I explained it to others was it looked like Lake Shore Drive during the 4th of July fireworks. It seemed as though everybody in Prescott Valley was flocking to that neighborhood to see what was going on. So access was a big problem with traffic and all the people that were going there to take a look at things. So that causes a problem. The fire hose laying across the street and shutting things off. General public might not be in the loop on how we view that kind of stuff, and not running over fire hose. That fire hose coming from the hydrant is a lifeline to the guys on the end of those nozzles fighting that fire.
Right.
And if that hose is broken, that interruption could put them in a real dangerous spot and endanger their lives from going from flowing anywhere from 150 to 250 gallons a minute to nothing right now with that fire in front of you, just because of that interruption in the water supply. So we're big on trying to protect those supply lines. The police do a great job helping keep traffic off of those hose lines. So.
Yeah, and unfortunately up there, they didn't really have an officer. They had Lieutenant Kaufman trying to block the street.
Hey, I was just happy that Jason didn't run in with a fire extinguisher.
True,
because there may be a history of that with that individual.
I could see that. I could see that. Well, the other thing with that one, because the fire was defensive, which means that we didn't go interior because the original home was fully involved. The home behind it, that one sustained significant damage. I believe that was to the exterior. But not only is it a danger to the firefighters, but as we're trying to protect that other home that was significantly impacted by the fire from the first home, if we lose that fire line, we lose that the water. Well, now that structure stands a really good chance of actually catching on fire and burning it to the ground as well. So very important that the community understands, hey, if there's a hose laying across the road, please don't try to run over it. We understand you need to get where you're trying to go, but you're going to be delayed.
Yep. And we said that we only got a couple minutes of water on the fire truck. And once they hook up to a hydrant, they top that tank off. So you interrupt that water supply, they're back to only having just a couple of minutes of firefighting water in that truck. But that interruption between the two is what's real dangerous. The life safety component, that's always our first priority when we arrive at these things. The safety of our folks and the safety of the public. Police department beat us there. Shout out to them. They usually do. There's a lot more of them than there is us. And phenomenal job. Sergeant Spriggs was the sergeant on that day. I had a report from him very early on that they had already gotten everybody out of those homes around there. And they do this for us on our calls. And it saves our folks from having the task of going next door to get them out. It lets our folks fight the fire, and they help with that. And they did a phenomenal job with that and the traffic. Well,
in Prescott Valley PD, we have such a strong working relationship with them, and they do those things for us, and then we back them up in the field, and it's a really good relationship. So when the first in crew started pulling the lines off, and you said 53 was right there, did 53 drop line to the hydrant and supply?
They caught the hydrant and brought it to engine 58, and we had a second alarm coming also.
Right.
I called for that. I think I had just crossed the highway at 69 in Navajo, and there was reports that there was an imminent threat to those homes around. So
Right.
we asked for a second alarm, which doubles how many units we have coming in. We used all of them. So
Yeah, it was a hot fire. It was a first hotter day of the year, and then it wasn't like we were on flat ground.
no, that's a hilly area, steep driveway. The roads have angles to them. When I pulled in, talk about the heat in my vehicle, which is a pickup truck, I pulled in kind of towards the house that was burning and then backed up into the driveway across the street.
Right.
In the process of doing that, I could feel the heat inside my truck with
wow.
the windows up. So it was really warm. Those guys aren't able to get right up in that fire's face. In fact, we had one firefighter had a hood that was discolored and burned a little, and we're standing outside. We're not going in there. Very hot.
Well, and we had, at that point, we had 2 vehicles on fire outside as well. So you had the tires popping from the heat. You had ammo in the house that was going off. So there were a number of other factors there making noise, and the ammo burning can sometimes create another level of danger in these situations. So what did the first in crew do? They deployed the hose lines. 53's crew got them connected, deployed hose lines. What was their first step?
They focused. They went to the right side of the house, which in fire terms we call that the delta. We go A, B, C, and D as we go around the building is how we call it. So they're on the delta side. They pulled their lines there to try to keep it off of those exposures there.
Right.
I think the focus was the exposures because there was nothing we were going to save in the initial house because it was fully involved. And I'll go around the fire just so we talk about what actually burned. So the main house that was burning was 1,400 square feet, fully involved.
Okay.
There was 2 cars on the left side of the driveway that were burning. There was a car on the right side of the driveway that was burning. So that was the first part. As we work our way around, on the Bravo side, there was a detached single-room apartment on that property that became an exposure, and the side of that place was damaged and burned. On the back side of the house on Division Charlie, there was a large outbuilding. I think the guy used it as an office.
Okay.
A pretty good-sized wood-framed fixed structure. That completely burned. A metal shed back there burned, and an RV had some heat damage on the side of it on Charlie. As we move over to Division Delta on the right side of the house, they had a shed that fully burned, and then the side of their house had some heat damage and some things that melted and burned on the side of that house, but didn't actually get inside of that place.
And again, that's because of the quick actions of the crew. 911 was activated quickly. PVPD got there, made sure everyone was out of the exposure homes, made sure the family that was in the original structure was safe. Then our crews arrived on scene, deployed hose lines, long lays for large diameter hose. Had some of our folks impacted by the heat that day, several of them, and then got back up and got back in the fight again. How long did it take to get the fire under control and then fully extinguished?
I think if I remember right, we were about 45 minutes until it was actually time-stamped and marked in dispatch that we had a knockdown and there was no further fire spread at that point. I will mention, too, that the 3rd In unit, props to Adam Wagner, was an acting captain on Engine 59. They were the 3rd In. So all the units are on their way there trying to figure out the best way to get in there to not be in the way, but the best strategic spot. And Adam didn't have an order to do so, which I don't encourage with our folks, but he got put in a spot where he had to make a decision. So 58 was already reporting that it was catching the exposures on fire. Right. And Adam was coming into onto Ocotillo where everybody else was.
Right.
And at that point, he didn't have an order, but he made a decision. And I give him props because we're in the business of making decisions.
Right.
And he had to make a very rapid decision. Were they going to stage and just sit there and wait for an order?
Right.
He saw a need. He had his acting engineer, Josh Redfern, turned around, and they went over onto the street on the backside, which was Glen Rosa, pulled 2 lines off, and they were a huge factor on that Charlie side, the back side, keeping it to that outbuilding and the shed and not letting it get at that house that was on the backside, that residence.
And he was communicating with you as he was doing this.
Yes. He said he was going to go over onto that side. So that extra 1,000 gallons on that backside that we wouldn't have had, and that access of them pulling their hose lines through that yard on that backside was absolutely critical. That's the direction that the wind was blowing everything. So.
And the wind was blowing pretty good that day.
Yeah. And
right at the front of that house.
If I remember right, it was our warmest day of the season. It was 84, 85 degrees. Winds were in the 20s, if I remember right. And I remember being glad that it wasn't the next day, because the day after the fire, I think the winds were in the 30s.
Yeah,
which would have really made it even worse.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and you talked about having mixed crews, because you had Zach Toucharm was acting engineer on 58, Josh Redfern, acting engineer on 59. Both did outstanding jobs. This was Zach's first fire he ever pumped. And not only was he doing a great job pumping the fire, but I came in not as part of the second alarm. I just came in when you called the second alarm. And I saw Zach out there, not just pumping the engine, but taking care of his crew, getting them water, making sure they had what they needed, getting their tanks replaced. And then on 53, we had newer engineer, Jace Hall, who not only pumped the truck, but left the truck in one piece, which is something for him.
It's always appreciated when at the end of the day, when Jace can return a truck in its original state.
Yes, we appreciate when he does that. So there were a lot of folks in newer positions or acting positions that day from different shifts. And I think this really goes at credit to training. And I say that because you had people from different shifts who don't normally work together. You had people in acting positions. And from my perspective, looking at it, and you'll talk about it in the AAR on Thursday, but everything went really well from the fire department standpoint of knocking down the original structure, protecting the exposures. Nothing we were going to do with that original structure.
Yeah.
The one that first caught fire, by the time we got a call, it was so heavily involved that there's no way to save that. Nothing we could do.
Yep. And John Dwyer is our probationary firefighter here at 53. So that was his very first actual structure fire. And I don't want to give the public the wrong impression, but you know, we do all this training. There's absolutely an adrenaline side to the firefighting versus some of the other types of calls that we go on. And John's been kind of bummed because we haven't really had much for a real fire like this since he got on. So was just telling him the other day, like, be patient, don't worry, it'll come. You'll get your fire that you've trained so hard for. And then he also has a competitive thing going with Dan Hampton, who's a probationary firefighter here at 53 on A shift.
Oh,
so
gotcha.
After this fire was over, I think he was very quick to let his buddy, Mr. Hampton, know what he had just experienced.
I think they were racing each other, flipping pancakes at the pancake breakfast on Sunday.
They're very competitive in all aspects.
Yes.
Yeah.
But good people. And I guess one of the last things we just want to cover very quickly, we had the new Fire Marshal, Daryl Turpak, on last week. And he investigated this fire, and unfortunately, it was discarded smoking materials on the front porch. So we just want to remind the public, if you smoke, please use an appropriate type of receptacle to put your cigarette butt out, and not just around your house and on your porch, but if you're in your car this time of year. Brad, you and I both know, fine fuels, it's getting hotter and it's windy and things are going to start drying out. And those cigarettes, not only can they burn a house down, but they can start a wildland urban interface fire.
We see a lot of fires. We need to be
careful
from that stuff.
Yes.
Discarded cigarettes, the dragging chains, all that kind of stuff. I can't even count in my career how many fires were started on wood decks around houses from people not taking care of their cigarettes. Unfortunately, it happens, and that's definitely been a cause of many fires that I've been on.
And this is the second one that I've seen where a home on a windy day, heavily involved. Both of them were cigarettes that were put out in old planters that still had old dead plants in them. And that was the challenge on the fire. And this was years ago out in Chino, and then now here. The other thing, just a quick reminder for folks, it is barbecue season. And that's another one that we see a lot of structure fires from and wildfires, because of barbecuing. So please be very careful when you're barbecuing, especially with open flames and charcoal grills and the wind. So
Yes.
just some things to be mindful of. But Brad, thank you so much for coming in today to talk about this fire. I think Kathy's going to put some video and pictures with this so the public can kind of see what we were dealing with. But excellent job by your crews and your shift.
I want to take the real quick opportunity. I know she's about ready to cut us off because we're right at that.
We're at that time. She's a
established,
taskmaster.
Time limit. Yes. 5:40 rounded out that first alarm assignment.
Right.
They were pumping one of the hydrants. They're our daytime engine.
Mm-hmm.
They were kept on well past their normal 5 p.m. Go home time. The rest of the second alarm, we had 2 engines from Prescott Fire. We had a battalion chief from Prescott Fire. Jim Kennedy was the acting battalion chief. He came in and took the safety officer position for me. Everybody just did a phenomenal job. Everybody worked real hard. It absolutely, definitely a situation that could have been a lot worse than it was. But those guys really, especially those first arriving units, really busted their tails to keep it out of those other homes.
They did an excellent job, and we'd be remiss if we didn't point out that Priority Ambulance and Lifeline Ambulance were both on the scene. The priority ambulance that was there is Priority 115, which is actually our Rescue 58 that's co-staffed by Priority and paramedic from CAFMA. Kind of a stopgap until we get more ambulances into the system. But overall, a lot of folks there, a lot of folks took part, a lot of folks put a lot of work in that day. Excellent job by the crews. And if you could pass that along Thursday, because I don't know if I'll be there for the AAR. But
we had a Lifeline paramedic rig there the entire time. We had APS, we had Unisource, we had Red Cross, we had the ACT volunteers. Again, shout out to our police department. I can't stress that enough. When I go out of the area to other places, I always brag about the relationship we have with our law enforcement, not just PVPD, but the other agencies, YCSO and whatnot.
Chino Valley, Prescott
awesome
PD, even.
Teamwork with everybody.
Yep, absolutely. And our partners with Prescott coming in to help out. Hopefully we'll have more resources in the future. It's something that we're working on that you're
More people and more hydrants.
very familiar with.
Yes.
More people, more hydrants, more equipment. Brad, again, thank you so much. Kathy, thank you for being here this morning. I know you're a little bit after me. I actually beat you to the studio, but thank you for coming in. And, well, until next time, thank you for watching.